Have you ever felt hurt when someone criticized you? Maybe it was just a passing comment, something said casually, yet it lingered in your mind all day. It kept echoing like a small scratch that somehow cut deep. You couldn't shake it off. You felt upset, disrespected, even wounded. Outwardly, you stayed silent. But inside, a storm of emotions was stirring. Or perhaps you felt anger rise up simply because your efforts weren't acknowledged. You tried hard. You gave your time, your energy, even your heart, but no one seemed to notice. No praise. No appreciation. And suddenly, you felt invisible, overlooked. That silent pain turned into frustration, maybe even bitterness. In those moments, it's easy to point fingers. It's their fault, they're cold, they're unfair. But if you pause and look deeper, you'll see. It's your ego reacting. And if you don't see that, it will keep making you suffer, again and again, for a lifetime. Ego is the root of suffering. The Buddha. This simple yet profound teaching reveals the hidden source of most of our inner turmoil. When someone hurts you with words, it's not just the words that cause the pain. It's the ego clinging to an image of itself. When someone ignores your effort, it's the ego that cries out, "I deserve more." The truth is, it's not the situation that causes the suffering, but how the ego responds to it. So what exactly is the ego? The ego is the story you've created about who you are. I am someone smart. I should be respected. I must not be humiliated. I need to be better than others. It's a fragile identity built from memories, roles, expectations, comparisons, and fears. At first, ego helps us navigate the world. But over time, if we don't recognize it for what it is, we begin to mistake the ego for our true self. We defend it, feed it, and suffer for it. The ego is easily threatened. It reacts strongly to criticism. It feels insecure when others succeed. It constantly craves praise, attention, validation, and still, it's never enough. But who are you, really, if not your ego? You are not what others think of you. You are not your job, your title, your image, your success, or your failures. You are not the labels society placed on you: good, weak, difficult, successful, not enough. Beneath the ego is something untouched, calm, spacious, alive. There is a quiet awareness within you that doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't need recognition. It isn't afraid of being less. It simply is. That awareness, your true nature, is never hurt. Never angry, never lacking. But to see it, you must first recognize the voice of ego, and begin to step out of its shadow. Every time you feel hurt, it's an invitation. Not to blame others. Not to suppress the feeling. But to turn inward and ask, what part of me is reacting right now? Why did that comment hurt me? What am I really afraid of? Just by pausing to ask these questions, you don't have to suppress the ego. You don't have to destroy it. You only need to recognize it, smile at it like an old friend, and let it pass. The moment you no longer take it personally, you are already free. You stop being a prisoner of praise and blame. You no longer chase approval or fear rejection. You stop needing others to confirm your worth. You live, love, speak, and act, not from ego, but from truth. So what is enlightenment? It's not about becoming special or perfect. It's simply about realizing, you are not your ego. And from that realization, peace arises. A quiet kind of peace. A soft strength. A freedom that doesn't need to shout. You can succeed without arrogance. You can be criticized without collapse. You can live without being bound to who you should be. So if you've ever felt hurt by criticism, if you've ever felt angry because no one saw your efforts, don't blame yourself. And don't blame others. Just take it as a gentle invitation to look inward. To recognize the ego. To breathe. And in that stillness, let go. Because the moment you see the ego clearly, you are no longer under its control. And that, quietly, beautifully, is the beginning of true liberation. So what exactly is the self? If you sit in stillness and listen deeply enough, you'll begin to realize that what we often call I is not a fixed entity. It changes with the situation, with how others see us, with praise and blame, with memories and dreams. In the morning, you might feel confident. By nightfall, you may feel small and uncertain. When things go well, you feel proud. When they don't, you feel unworthy. So what, then, is this I? From the Buddhist perspective, the self is not a singular thing. It's a stream of reactions, echoes of the past, habitual patterns, conditioned tendencies. We've lived with them for so long. From a young age, we hear, "You're so smart. You're shy. You need to be responsible. You shouldn't do that." Innocent words, perhaps, but over time, they become a cage. This is who I am. I can't be otherwise. We become trapped in the image we've created. We no longer flow like a river, we freeze into ice, rigid, fragile, and constantly afraid of shattering. We cling to identities and titles, afraid that without them, we'd be nothing at all. The ego needs an opposite in order to exist. It can't stand on its own. It thrives in comparison. I'm better than. I'm worse than. I'm right. They're wrong. I'm hurt. They're the cause. The ego can't survive in stillness. It needs conflict, drama, validation. It needs to be seen as special, acknowledged, praised. And yet, the more you feed the ego, the more imprisoned you become. The more you crave understanding, the more it hurts when others don't get you. The more you try to prove your worth, the more fragile it becomes. The more you need to be loved, the more you fear being left. And so, the cycle never ends, chasing, resisting, doubting, needing. Letting go of the ego is not abandoning yourself. It's coming home to the truth. The truth is, you are not the image others see. You are not the story you've told yourself. You are not your job, your reputation, your past. You are awareness itself, breathing, watching, feeling, without needing to be defined. And you begin to touch that truth the moment you stop trying to be someone. In meditation, you do nothing, you simply observe. You watch the ego flare up, I'm hurt. You notice the emotional wave, this feels unfair. You see the thoughts spinning. They don't understand me. But instead of following them, you sit quietly, like someone watching the river from the bank. And you realize, these are just waves. They rise, and they fall. But you, the one who sees, remain still. In that silence, you begin to live unburdened by ego. No longer reacting out of habit. No longer fearing how you appear. No longer depending on someone else's love to feel whole. What is freedom, if not the ability to live without performing? To live without trying to impress. To live without measuring yourself against others. To cry, not because you're weak, but because you no longer need to be strong. To laugh, not to mask the pain, but because something inside has become light. Freedom doesn't come from changing your outer life. It comes from seeing clearly within, and no longer being pulled by the illusions that once held you tight. Behind the noise of the mind, there is always a quiet stillness. When you stop trying to become. When you release the need to be seen. When you allow yourself to just be, undefined, unguarded. You will find a sacred space within. A space that needs no explanation. A space that doesn't care whether anyone understands. It only asks that you show up, fully, gently, honestly. And in that space, the ego fades. It's a question that often arises not in moments of calm, but in moments of emotional turbulence. When someone says something harsh, and you feel pierced. When you're overlooked, and a quiet voice whispers, "You're not good enough." When another person succeeds, and instead of joy, you feel a pang of envy. These reactions might seem natural, even human. But beneath them lies a deeper truth. The ego is not just reacting, it's trying to protect a fragile illusion. The ego wants to control, to dominate, to be special. It thrives on being noticed, on being praised, on being right. When it feels criticized, it flares up in anger. How dare they? When it feels ignored, it sinks into self-pity. I must not matter. When it sees others shine, it feels diminished. That should have been me. This is not your fault. It's simply how the ego operates, always comparing, always measuring. Success will ebb and flow. And if your sense of self is built upon constant recognition and control, then peace will always be out of reach. The ego resists what is. It demands what it wants. It says, they must respect me. They must agree with me. I must not lose. I must be admired. But the world doesn't bend to our preferences. So when reality doesn't meet the ego's expectations, what happens? We suffer. We stew in resentment. We dwell in self-doubt. We harden our hearts. All because a story in the mind says, this shouldn't be happening to me. But what if we didn't take the ego so seriously? What if we could step back, even for a moment, and see it for what it is? Just a conditioned voice. Just old patterns echoing from the past. Just a strategy for survival that has run its course. You're not wrong for having an ego. We all do. But you don't have to believe everything it says. You don't have to obey its every demand. And you don't have to let it define your worth. Because underneath all that noise, there is something quieter, deeper, more true. Stillness doesn't react, it simply witnesses. When you pause and watch closely, you begin to see the inner workings of the ego. A thought arises, they don't respect me. An emotion follows, anger. This is the ego trying to protect something. And in that moment, you begin to loosen its grip. Not by fighting it. Not by shaming yourself. But by seeing clearly, this isn't who I truly am. Your true nature doesn't need to be right, admired, or in control. It doesn't panic when someone else succeeds. It doesn't shrink when no one notices. It doesn't inflate when praised. It simply is, open, aware, compassionate. That is the space where suffering dissolves. Not because life gets easier, but because you're no longer clinging so tightly to the ego's script. So what happens when the ego begins to quiet down? You no longer take things so personally. You stop needing to win every argument. You let go of the hunger to be understood or applauded. You feel joy for others without comparing yourself. You sit with pain without needing to blame anyone. This isn't weakness. It's inner freedom. And from that freedom arises peace, not as an idea, but as a living reality. What did the Buddha say about the self? The Buddha never denied the presence of human experience. But he pointed out that what we commonly call I, or me, is not something fixed or truly real. In the Pali Canon, he taught anatta, non-self, meaning there is no permanent, independent, or unchanging self. Let's look closely. We think this body is me, yet every cell is constantly dying and regenerating. We assume our emotions belong to us, but they shift with just a thought, a glance, a word. We cling to ideas, memories, and beliefs, but they drift like clouds across the sky of awareness, here one moment, gone the next. So what, then, is I? A name? A face in the mirror? A collection of past experiences? All of it changes. All of it is impermanent. And whatever is impermanent, cannot be a true, lasting self. The illusion of self, root of suffering. Even though we hear that everything is impermanent, we still instinctively cling to a sense of self. This is my body. These are my emotions. I'm right. When someone criticizes us, the ego is wounded, we react and feel pain. When we lose status, possessions, or loved ones, the ego collapses, we spiral into despair. When others succeed, the ego compares, we feel envy or inadequacy. The ego doesn't want to lose, be wrong, or let go. It tries to control, defend, and maintain the illusion of being stable, important, and solid. And the more we try to protect that illusion, the more we suffer. The self is like smoke, the more you grasp. He taught that human experience is composed of 5 aggregates, Pankakanda. Form, the physical body. Feeling, sensations. Perception, recognition. Mental formations, thoughts and volitions. Consciousness, awareness. These elements are in constant flux. There is no permanent I in any of them. It's like a car made of parts, wheels, frame, engine. If you take them apart, the car vanishes. It's just a label we give to a collection of parts. We are the same. The self we cling to is merely a temporary combination of body and mind, governed by causes and conditions. But we don't see that. We mistake the mirage for water, chase after it, only to be left empty and lost. Seeing non-self, the gateway to freedom. So how do we go beyond the ego? Not by fighting it. Not by suppressing it. But by practicing mindful awareness, by simply observing things as they are. When the body aches, just notice, pain is present. When the mind is anxious, notice, anxiety is arising. No judgment. No ownership. Not, I am in pain, but simply, there is pain. This simple shift in perspective, from identification to observation, is transformational. Gradually, you realize everything arises and fades. There is no lasting I within any of it. Only a flowing river of cause and effect, like water slipping through your fingers. And in that insight, there is peace. There is no longer anything to defend, to prove, to cling to. Non-self doesn't mean no heart. Some people wonder, if there is no self, what's left of a human being? What about love, purpose, and individuality? But non-self does not mean being cold or disconnected. On the contrary, when we are no longer trapped by the ego, we are free to live more fully, more compassionately. We can love without needing to be loved in return. We can give without keeping score. We can be fully present without needing to impress or perform. Because we no longer need to be someone. We simply are, here, now, with open awareness and a quiet heart. That is the deepest kind of freedom. True nature, beyond all names and forms. As the illusion of ego dissolves, something beautiful begins to emerge. A deep stillness. A quiet joy that doesn't rely on anything. A sense of wholeness, not found in gaining or becoming, but in letting go. This is what some traditions call true nature. It's not another version of self, but a presence that is beyond self, beyond concepts of me and you, gain and loss, praise and blame. Here, you stop searching for yourself. Because you've come home, to the awareness that sees but does not cling, that loves without grasping, that rests in what is. This is the heart of the Buddha's teaching on non-self. Not a philosophy to debate, but a truth to taste, in the silence of meditation, in the letting go of clinging. In the gentle unfolding of awareness. The consequences of living through the ego. When you live through the ego, you're not truly living, you're merely reacting. Life becomes a string of constant reactions, feeling defensive when your pride is touched, jealous when others surpass you, wounded when you're not acknowledged. And angry when no one seems to understand you. Your mind turns into a restless lake, stirred by even the slightest breeze from the outside world. The ego is like a mask you've worn for so long that you mistake it for your true face. But that mask suffocates you. It prevents you from truly listening, from loving wholeheartedly, from simply being. It demands endlessly, to be recognized, to be admired, to be right, to be in control. And when these demands aren't met, it either shrinks into silent resentment or lashes out in frustration. Living through the ego is like being trapped in a small room where everything revolves around the self. I'm right, I'm hurt. I deserve more, I'm better than others. When you place me at the center of everything, even the smallest incident becomes a threat. A random comment can keep you up at night. A mild criticism can crush your confidence. Someone else's success can make you question your own worth. In relationships, the ego creates distance. You're not really listening, you're waiting to reply. You're not truly caring, you're hoping to be cared for. When others don't act according to your expectations, you feel betrayed. When they don't validate you, you assume they don't love you. And little by little, even the people who once loved you the most feel pushed away, not because they've changed, but because the ego has quietly wedged itself in between. One of the most painful consequences of ego-driven living is the loss of inner peace. Your mind is no longer a refuge, it becomes a battlefield. You're constantly on guard, comparing yourself, judging, defending, performing. When you succeed, your ego swells, but it's never satisfied. When you fail, the ego collapses, and you're left feeling worthless. The ego swings endlessly between arrogance and insecurity, hope and disappointment, excitement and emptiness. There's no real peace in that cycle. The ego also blocks your capacity to love unconditionally. Because beneath the surface of affection lies a hidden contract. I'll love you, as long as you make me happy. The moment the other person fails to meet your needs, challenges your views, or stops acting how you want them to, that love easily turns into blame, bitterness, or indifference. That's not love, it's emotional dependency dressed in the illusion of care. Ironically, the more you live from the ego, the lonelier you become. The ego always needs others to reflect and validate its identity, but it won't allow genuine connection. You can be surrounded by people and still feel isolated. You might have many friends but feel like no one truly knows you. Deep down, the ego is always building walls. I must protect myself. I can't let them see my weakness. I need to stay strong. I have to be right. In this way, you become a prisoner of your own mind, locked inside a cage you unknowingly built yourself. If you take a closer look at your suffering, some can lose status and remain at peace. Others fall apart just from being ignored. The difference lies not in the situation, but in the level of ego attachment. The more you cling to the ego, the more you suffer. The more you let go, the lighter you feel. But you can't force yourself to drop the ego by willpower alone. The more you fight it, the more it fights back. What you can do is observe it with mindfulness, moment by moment. When anger arises, instead of saying, "I'm angry," try noticing, anger is here. When you feel the need to win, recognize the ego is seeking approval. When you feel the urge to prove yourself, ask, what am I lacking inside that needs to be proven out there? But it no longer controls you. You begin to live from a deeper place, not from striving, but from understanding. Not from seeking validation, but from compassion and inner alignment. You no longer struggle to become someone, but instead, you just show up fully in this moment. And that's when life truly begins, not as a performance of the ego, but as a real, gentle unfolding of your being. Letting go of the ego, it doesn't mean weakness. Letting go of the ego doesn't mean becoming invisible, bland, or without personality. It doesn't mean silencing your inner voice or denying the unique qualities that make you who you are. On the contrary, it's the path back to your most authentic self, a return to the still, unshakable presence that no longer needs to prove anything. In the world, ego is often mistaken for strength. People believe the louder you assert yourself, the more respect you deserve. The more you push your identity, the more power you hold. But real strength doesn't lie in loud declarations or firm stances. Real strength is the quiet steadiness that stays centered in the middle of chaos. It's compassion that arises not from weakness, but from deep understanding. When you let go of ego, you don't become weaker, you just stop bracing. You no longer feel the need to defend yourself against every opinion, every misunderstanding. You don't have to seek validation through arguments or comparisons. You stop feeling restless every time someone overlooks your efforts or questions your worth. There's a gentle calmness that emerges when you're no longer trying to be seen in a certain way. You can listen fully without formulating your next reply. You're no longer reacting from fear or insecurity. You can speak truth without aggression. You can pause without feeling like you're giving in. You can serve others without needing recognition. This is not weakness, it's a quiet kind of strength that doesn't need to shout to be felt. Letting go of ego doesn't mean losing your ability to choose. It means you're no longer imprisoned by your habitual reactions. Instead of lashing out when criticized, you take a breath. Instead of defending, you reflect. In that space, between stimulus and response, true insight has room to emerge. When the ego no longer leads, you begin to live with a quiet kind of freedom. The things that used to deeply hurt you become mere waves passing through. The criticism that once triggered deep wounds now becomes a mirror for reflection. The Buddha didn't teach us to erase personality. He taught us to release attachment. Personality, when not ruled by ego, can be a beautiful expression of life. But when ego uses it to stake a claim, to build an identity or win validation, it becomes a heavy burden. True letting go doesn't happen in one dramatic act, it happens subtly, quietly, over time. You don't have to scream out, "I've let go of my ego." You simply start observing it when it shows up, and choose not to feed it. You pause in moments of reaction, take a breath, and respond from awareness instead of impulse. How to recognize the ego in daily life? Most of the time, we live unconsciously, reacting, getting angry, feeling proud or jealous, without truly noticing what is operating inside us. We say, "I'm angry, I'm hurt, I want to succeed," but have you ever paused to ask, who is this I that's speaking? Who is getting angry? Who is trying to prove something? If you stop long enough in a moment of awareness, you'll see that the one who's angry is not your true self. It's the ego, a shadow formed from memories, habits, desires, and fears. Your self-worth, your carefully built identity. A wave of discomfort rises. Instantly, you want to fight back, defend yourself, or retreat into silence, secretly nursing your pain. In moments like that, a simple question can open the door to self-awareness. Who is hurt right now? What inside me is reacting so strongly? You might realize, it's not you that's in pain, it's the image of you that's been bruised. A part of the mind, nurtured by expectations and comparison, is feeling threatened. And you are identifying with it, believing, this emotion is who I am. But in truth, you're simply being carried away by it. Watching your emotions is one of the most direct ways to recognize the ego. When someone praises you, observe what inside you swells with pleasure. When someone criticizes you, notice what shrinks and tightens in resistance. That is the ego, it feeds on praise and feels attacked by rejection. Mindfulness is the light that reveals the ego's subtle workings. Each day, you're given countless chances to witness the ego in action. When you feel jealous of someone else's success. When you're unhappy about not being recognized. When you react strongly to someone disagreeing with you. When you insist on being right, no matter what. In every one of these moments, if you're quiet enough to observe, you'll see something inside that always wants to win, to be someone, to be right. And you can gently smile to yourself, ah, the ego is here again. Just seeing it is already a form of letting go. You don't have to force yourself to be egoless overnight. Begin simply by noticing, really noticing, when the ego arises. And refrain from acting blindly under its influence. Every time you choose not to react, not to defend the self-image, you take a step closer to inner freedom. A practitioner isn't someone who never feels emotions, but someone who sees those emotions clearly without identifying with them. Like someone standing on the riverbank watching the water flow, they still see every ripple, but they are no longer swept away. They may still feel anger or sadness. But they don't let those feelings control them. Instead, they act with compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom, not because they should, but because that naturally arises when the ego fades. The ego will still be there, but you're no longer its prisoner. Each day, just cultivate a little more awareness, a little more observation, a little less reactivity. Gradually, the light of awareness begins to reach every shadow where the ego hides. And when the light is strong enough, the ego doesn't need to be defeated, it simply dissolves, like darkness fading at sunrise. You don't need to become someone greater. You simply need to come home, home to simplicity, stillness, and full presence. From there, you can live, not driven by ego, not chasing recognition, not fearing criticism. You live as naturally as the breath, present, fresh, needing no defense, no effort. Meditation, dissolving the ego, awakening compassion. In daily life, most people are not truly living in the present moment. Instead, they are swept away by a stream of thoughts, assumptions, and reactions. A simple comment, a slight glance, a small mistake, any of these can stir up a whirlwind of emotions, anger, hurt, defensiveness. These reactions don't arise from our true nature, but from the ego, a false self built from habits, memories, and the craving for approval. But when you begin to practice mindful meditation, something remarkable starts to happen. You begin to see clearly what's happening within you. You are no longer entangled in your emotions, you become the silent witness. A thought arises, and you recognize, this is just a thought. A wave of emotion rises, vast and full. In that empty space, compassion arises naturally, not as a forced virtue, but as a natural radiance from the heart. Why? Because when the ego quiets, it's about returning inward to meet yourself, honestly, courageously, to observe the habits, desires, fears, and defenses of the ego. To witness everything as it is, without judgment. But what happens if you stop reacting in the old ways? When insulted, you pause and simply observe. When rejected, you feel the sting of pain, but watch it rise and fall like a wave. Knowing that this too is not your essence. When others are praised and you feel envy arise, you gently acknowledge it, then watch it drift away like a passing cloud. And in those moments where you no longer react the way you used to, you begin to realize something. Freedom is real. Freedom is not about controlling others or your circumstances. It's about not being controlled by your ego. Freedom is when your peace is no longer held hostage by praise or blame, success or failure. Freedom is when you can love without needing to possess. When you can give without expecting anything in return. Compassion does not come from ideals. It is born in a heart that is no longer crowded by the noise of ego. Only when the ego stops grasping and fighting can love begin to flow freely. Only when I no longer wants to win, can we begin to matter. That's why the Buddha taught. The mind that clings to nothing is the mind of compassion. Compassion is not a heroic act, it's the natural fragrance of a still heart. And meditation is the path that returns you to that heart. You don't need to become someone better. You don't need to fix yourself. You only need to see clearly, see the ego, see your thoughts, see the illusions that hold you hostage. And as clarity grows, all else begins to shift. You start to see that thoughts are just clouds passing through the sky of awareness. Emotions are just waves on the ocean of your being. An ego is just a shadow play, nothing real to defend, nothing solid to fear. When you no longer fight to protect the false self, you become gentle, open, and light. Compassion is born. No striving. No performance. Just the quiet return to your own stillness, and the subtle blooming of your true self. The result of letting go of the ego. When you begin to let go of the ego, not through sheer willpower, but through deep mindfulness, what you feel first is not loss, but lightness. It's as if you've just put down a heavy bag you didn't even know you were carrying. A hidden burden, the need to be right, to be more, to be accepted, to be loved. And then, a quiet peace begins to rise. Not the kind of peace that comes when everything is temporarily fine. But a deep, lasting peace that doesn't depend on circumstances, a peace that lives inside you. It doesn't come from success, praise, or external validation. It comes from releasing the grip of that inner identity that once controlled every thought, reaction, and decision. When you're no longer governed by ego, you no longer need to prove anything to anyone. You're no longer pulled into the games of comparison, winning, or self-defense. You don't need to always be right. You don't need to shine. You don't need to stand out. You can simply smile in silence. You can listen without needing to interrupt. You can stay behind the scenes and still feel as solid as a mountain. Humility doesn't need to be practiced, it naturally arises. Because when there's no ego left to defend, no image to uphold, no position to protect, humility becomes your natural way of being. You no longer need to appear humble, you simply are. You become soft, not because you're weak, but because you're no longer bound by the need to be seen as strong. You begin to feel truly happy. In a simple and quiet way. Not because something amazing has happened. Not because the perfect person has entered your life. Not because you've reached some great milestone. You're happy because you are fully here, present, alive. Joy arises from the smallest things, a deep breath, sunlight on the leaves, a breeze brushing your chest, a gaze that carries no judgment. Freedom is no longer a concept, it becomes a lived experience. You are free because your actions are no longer dictated by unconscious emotions. You don't feel the urge to react, to fight back, to cling. When someone criticizes you, you don't take it personally. When someone succeeds, you no longer feel diminished. When life gets hard, you don't look for someone to blame. Everything is just waves, and you are the ocean beneath. You begin to return to your true self, not the image ego created. You're no longer defined by the past, by roles, names, or status. You don't need to become someone. You just are, and in that being, everything is enough. There is nothing missing. Others can feel your presence, solid, calm, and kind. You're not loud. You don't try to dominate. But there's something grounding about you. When you're around, people feel safe. When you speak, your words carry a quiet strength, not because you're trying to convince, but because they come from a place beyond fear and pride. Letting go of the ego doesn't mean you lose anything. In fact, it means you rediscover what is most real in you, compassion, honesty, and a deep, sincere connection to life. Each day is no longer a competition, it becomes a sacred return. A return to the miracle of now. A return to the wind, the breath, the birdsong. The stillness at dawn. Letting go of ego doesn't mean you stop acting, dreaming, or striving. You still act, but not to get anything. You act out of clarity, love, and freedom. Your movement is no longer reactive or grasping. It flows from stillness, from awareness, from truth. And that is when you truly live, no longer a shadow chasing approval or escaping fear. These words of the Buddha echo across the centuries, not to be displayed on temple walls, but to serve as a mirror for the soul. A mirror we quietly return to, again and again. In the silence of everyday life. In this world, so many strive to succeed, to be admired, to feel validated. But few are willing to turn inward and face the subtle, often invisible force that shapes our suffering, the ego. The ego isn't inherently bad. It is a natural part of the human mind. It gives us a sense of self, helps us function, and survive. But when left unobserved, when allowed to run wild, it becomes a master rather than a servant. It begins to define your worth, dictate your emotions, and distort your perception of others. When the ego leads, you live in fear. A single harsh word can make you boil with anger. Someone else's success makes you feel insecure. A small rejection triggers a flood of self-doubt. So you react. You defend. You fight to prove your worth. But deep down, you feel more exhausted, not more fulfilled. Holding on to the ego is like grasping a burning coal to stay warm, it only burns you. Every negative emotion, every impulsive reaction, is like smoke rising from that fire. But we often fail to see it. We mistake the ego's voice for our own, believing we're standing up for ourselves. When in fact, we're simply being ruled. Letting go of the ego doesn't mean losing your personality or silencing your voice. It means rising above the ego, so you can live with compassion, wisdom, and humility. It means no longer reacting from wounds, but responding from clarity. It means no longer needing to win, because you've stopped being driven by fear. True freedom doesn't come from being admired, it comes from no longer being held hostage by your ego. When you let go of your need to prove yourself, you begin to live lightly. You don't have to be special to be worthy. You don't need to be the best to feel fulfilled. You just are, and that's enough. From that still place within, you can love without attachment. Give without expectation. Speak without manipulation. Move through life like a cloud drifting through the sky, untouched, weightless. The greatest victory is not standing on top of the world. It's being able to smile at the things that used to enrage you. It's staying silent when the ego begs you to fight. It's stepping back to see things clearly. It's forgiving, not because others deserve it, but because you no longer want to carry the poison. That is the way of mindful living. Not loud. Not flashy. But deeply transformative. And now, if you've listened this far, something inside you may already be stirring. A quiet longing to live more gently, to drop the burdens you no longer need, to remember the simple joy of just being. Don't ignore that feeling. Take a moment to reflect. How did your ego show up today? Did you respond with awareness, or react from pain? What small step can you take now to return to your true self? If this reflection touched something in you, please consider sharing your thoughts in the comments. Your honest words might help someone else feel less alone on their path. Just as you are. May you rest in presence, walk with peace, and slowly, gently return home to the quiet truth that needs no defense, no praise, no validation. Only awareness.